Hello everybody, I'll try to go short. I don't want to get into the habit of like doing the update every night. I'm in the middle of uploading videos on these other sites right now. This is yesterday's paper, Collapsed Bridges Firm Working in Corpus. I didn't get a chance to read the yesterday paper, so I didn't pick up today's. Obviously the news would be the bomber killed himself. Young boy, young kid, 20-something. So that would be the top news. I would have spoke earlier because I'm checking the news today. And, oh, I might try to add a catchy title. Oh, it's windy out here, right? But I didn't speak because it was too windy by my little spot, and I talked to a lot of people today. I was checking the news throughout the day. And this would just be a lesson in, I guess, maybe geopolitical things. I wanted to Google. I'm familiar with, just stories about the mafia and the mob and everything. And I was familiar with the anthrax thing before I realized that the debacle of the anthrax thing happened to be Mr. Mueller. But I was familiar with that because of personal history with that. Responding to anthrax runs that were fake because it was not solved. Okay, so I didn't need to then Google, is the fact that Mr. Mueller botched the anthrax, is it a conspiracy? No, I knew he botched it. It just, at that stage in history, he was not the special prosecutor. Okay, so what I was checking, as well as all the news today on all the sites, on my phone, I said, was Mueller involved in the famous or infamous Whitey Bulger case? Now, maybe the first 5 things that popped up, I'm looking for a news from a reputable news source, Washington Post or Washington Times or something, New York Times, something like that. The first 5, at least on my phone on Google, were the conspiracy theorists, like associating Mueller with Whitey Bulger. Now, for those that are not familiar with Whitey Bulger and mafia history, some people would look at that, maybe young people, and think that all of that's fake. This is what you would get from just the Google search of the first 4 or 5, because that's what you saw. At least that's what I saw on my phone. And I'm looking for a news article. So I finally see 5 or 6 things down, New York Times. Okay. And it was back in 2011. I don't have to be told that the Whitey Bulger story, and I'll do a brief review of it, is a conspiracy, because I watched documentaries and I even saw the movie that came out last year, Black Mass. The Whitey Bulger story affects people that read about mafia and all, because it was a famous case of the Irish mobster in Boston, Massachusetts. Now I guess this is the 80s, and he was in competition with the Italian mafia guys, that part of our country, okay? A lot of that history that I've read books on it, and just out of interest. But the reason the case later became infamous was for one particular reason. Everybody that knows anything knows this. It was the FBI's corruption in that case. And when they made the movie called Black Mass, they probably wouldn't have made it now. But that's what it showed, the story. And the particular FBI guy who was convicted and I guess did prison time, I saw real clips of this documentary over the years, real on documentaries, was John Connolly, or Connolly was his name. And he was a young boy who was like friends with Bulger's brother or something when they were kids on the streets of Boston. And eventually Connolly rose the ranks and made it into the FBI. So he actually, at one time in his past, when Connolly was like a little kid, some kids were picking on him in school and Whitey Bulger was a few years older and like punched that other kid and defended him as kids growing up. And then Bulger went the life of crime and Connolly went the life of law enforcement. But they used Connolly as the connection to Whitey Bulger with the FBI. He was working as an undercover informant for the FBI. Okay, that's all legal and all. What was illegal? This case, this FBI case with Whitey Bulger in Boston back in the 80s, is probably the #1, if you will, FBI corruption collusion case out of all FBI stories in our country. It's probably #1. That's why it became so famous. Because what they allowed Whitey Bulger to do, and the Italian mob didn't like it, but they allowed Bulger to get away with murders and stuff. And they did a lot of illegal activity in this case. So when I Googled to the final New York Times article, that was 2011, I read a judge's opinion on it. It's very famous for corruption in the FBI. The only thing I wanted to know, I was not familiar with, was Mr. Mueller in that, and he sure was. He was part of that. And the article I read, which was before Mueller now, said many question whether he should have ever even risen the ranks to the position that he eventually had because of possible corruption and criminality in that case. Now, I only mentioned that to say this. When I Googled it, if somebody didn't know all of that like I knew simply because I was interested over the years, you would think all this is fake. That's what comes up on the Google search. The conspiracy of Mueller and Bulger. And the way it's presented in the Google search, you would think that all of it is fake. So just the facts are, it just so happened, which I was not aware of, that's why I Googled it, that Mueller was in that FBI office at that time that was known as corrupt and criminal because of murders and all. They also framed 4 guys. A few of them they sentenced to death. Back that, it said the electric chair, I guess they were still using it then. And the judges finally realized that, and that all took place with Mueller there. And he might have been in charge of that operation. Now, you say, but John, you're falling for, all I wanted to see was what I explained. Mr. Brennan had made some type of a defense and said, it's still possible that Mr. Trump could be blackmailed by Russia. A few things. What would that mean? First, how Mr. Mueller has gone through all of this stuff, any connections and all. More than likely, there would have been some attempt made from a Russian operative working for Mr. Putin to have already advanced that, to have already said, this is what we got. And the way they have gone through it so far with a fine-tooth comb, none of that's happened as far as we understand. Second, what would you do if somebody was a president and then maybe another country's leader had a sex tape or anything? What is blackmail mean? First, when a president's already in, that's the way it is. But second, blackmail means some country has something, video or something, that they could secretly use to try to get an upper hand in negotiations, that you would go better on us in various things. And of course, if it's never reported, the media could blackmail people by overemphasizing a story about a porn star, though there were many other cases of officials that had improper relationships that a lot of people never even heard of, because in those cases, if you will, blackmail didn't work because the media didn't run with it. Second, when Mr. Putin just won the election, I know Senator John McCain is a good man, but he's used language about Russia and Putin that's not helpful. It was under Mr. Obama's term and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State that they tried to say we're going to reset relationships with Russia. Because indeed, if there's one country besides the United States of America that could really be World War III, that's the one you're looking at, okay? And Mr. Obama actually said that the people who had the view that Russia was the enemy, this came up in one of the debates with Mitt Romney, because I think Romney said Russia's really the biggest threat, and Obama kind of mocked it at that time. But what I'm trying to show you is both Hillary Clinton and the previous administration and any responsible administration would want to say we need to be on a working relationship with Russia. And what happened over a period of time, I covered all this before, for whatever reasons, the United States, and we talk about deep state, but many liberals, ultra-liberals for many years, have also talking about neocons and people like Paul Wolfowitz, particular military people, and how they had this view that's going to lead us to a World War III. This was a liberal criticism of those who are making decisions. In the last few years, on the larger world scale, slowly, we've been trending that way, in this particular way. When the former Soviet Union broke up, you had former USSR states that became their own independent areas, Ukraine and Georgia and places like that. Now, one of the assurances that the Western world made, the United States made, was in this breakup, and of course you saw the rise of Putin, we said we're going to make sure we won't put weapons, actual weapons, in these other former USSR states. We're not going to put them in those countries. That would be a threat. That would be like Russia being part of Mexico now. Russia is in Mexico, and then Russia started putting nukes or whatever right in Mexico. We would not stand for that. Now, Putin agreed and worked with us when we made that promise, and we broke that promise. It wasn't in writing. And we started saying we're going to put defensive weapons in these former USSR countries that are now their own independent states, nation states type thing. That was a move that many analysts said, you're pushing this to World War III, not psychos or conspiracy theorists. And we've been doing that. Then we slapped sanctions on Russia. Mr. Kerry and Mr. Obama, and many people were saying, forget blackmail. Forget all that. If we're heading to something, will we ever have a World War III someday? Almost 100%. Someday. Will it be in the next few years or 10? Nobody really knows. But that trend has been going on now for like 10 years. That we had people that said, we view them as the enemy, and our goal is to destabilize them, which we're doing with these sanctions. It has to do with Ukraine. And our goal, ultimately, though we don't say it publicly, our actions are to bring them down. Now, we have done that in multiple other places with people that didn't really have the military to stop us. But we've not done it in places like Russia real brazenly for that one reason. The lesson that people learn is if you don't have arms, Libya, if you say you're giving up your nuclear ambitions under Gaddafi, then a year or two later we go in and back up your murder. Now these are the serious things. This is like, and so why do we do that? Look, it's because people have made decisions to trend down that way. And whether or not, at this stage of the game, somebody has something on Mr. Trump or any of that, these are the things that lead. Russia was willing, and Putin was willing to work with us on many of these things, and we're the ones that kind of push the limit, because now we've also put eventually not just defensive weapons, but we've put backup troops and offensive weapons right on the border in some of these countries. They deem us as a threat, and I don't think they're wrong, because they see that trend. So when he recently won the election, and so this is the whole thing that's created in our media now in this country. Russia the enemy, Russia the enemy, Russia the enemy. I'm not saying he's a good man, and I obviously don't agree with the way they have done certain things. But I believe, I think he won with 70% of the vote, 70-something percent. I understand people said there was corruption in the election. I think he still would have won regardless, because the people living in Russia, and looking at a lot of this that I just described to you, that most of the Western media never tells you, those people in Russia know about this. Now, I also believe if something happened where Trump had to do something, it would be a matter of days. Even if it was a real war, it would be a matter of days before the media would begin going down the same road of either he jumped the gun, meaning if we had an indication that there was a nuclear strike ready to be launched and they were launched, even if we did something, it would be a matter of days. That's how bad this has gotten in this country. So the real issues to be discussed would be some of the things I just talked about, that are the real issues, whether or not we're heading for trouble. There's no need to blackmail any leader of any country if you're on a relationship in some way for stability. And we, the U.S., have been the ones that have scuttled that relationship because of what I explained in this quick 17-minute video. The thing that I mentioned about Mueller and all, it was just to show you. It was just to show you, regardless of your view, are they going to go after him now? Of course they're going to go after him. He's hiring Joe DeGenova, and now yes, they're going to do that. They're going to do it like they did with Ken Starr and everybody else. But that's not, I'm not in the camp, let's go after Mueller. I just said the guy, because of the position he's in now, and he had this one-track mind with the anthrax thing, but he can't have that mind now, because it's dealing with a whole lot of other things, okay? And so that is a legitimate concern. So I'll do that as the update. I'm uploading the others. If I had my friends, I could have had them speak today. But that's fine. So I want to bless you guys. I'm going to finish Kings tomorrow. You'll see that like next week. And we already started Colossians. And I think the next one that's going to go up is one of my Sunday sermons. I taught someone on Hebrews. I shared verses from Corpus Christi Christian Fellowship, which I went to, which is Pastor Don Lavelle, and the verses from the Catholic Mass. So all of that is coming up, all right? Just God bless everybody.